Welcome back to AsArt. My name is Nick, and John is here with me. And today we're doing the full review of Season 3 from the perspective of a reader and a non-reader of the books. He does read, though. He does read. And when I say non-reader, just means he hasn't read his Dark Materials.
I read like the rabbit,
Yeah, the rabbit. It's not even a demon in his book. Okay, and then also I just want to let you guys know we've been doing breakdowns like crazy on his Dark Materials, from the Land of the Dead, the Harpies, the Man in the Box. There's so many deep dives we've been doing, and we got so many requests. We're probably going to be continuing the deep dives on characters and stuff like that. So subscribe, get all his Dark Material info here. And if you go to AsArt.space, Kyle did a design of the Galavespians the way they should be in the book, with dragonflies and not their mechanical wings. So go to AsArt.space to go get the shirt. John, we're going into Season 3.
Yeah. And let's hop in one thing, just because he talked about Kyle's shirt right there. My wife and I watched all the episodes together, and we were so annoyed with the little, brownie. I keep looking at these guys. I think the little brownie ninja like we could not stand that they were like technologically little. Yeah. It bothered us a lot.
Ant-Man and the Wasp almost, right? It had like mechanical wings. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, we just didn't know it. She kept saying, when is one of them going to get flicked? And then finally one of them got flicked. We're like, hey! We were all excited.
Okay, so let's go through it. What were your highlights of it? Like, what did you enjoy the most? Let's go positive before we hit the negative.
Yeah, I mean, and there's plenty of positive things. Like, if you guys have been around AsArt for a while, this is like Nick and I were talking just literally like 2 or 3 minutes before we started recording. And Nick goes, gosh, this is literally kind of one of the shows that AsArt started talking about. And here we are, X amount of years later, actually getting to cover it completed. And at first we were like, gosh, that's a pretty short time. But then Nick said, well, then again, when I think about all the stuff they had to shoot and create and do visual effects for, man, they got a lot out in a short period of time. And I definitely agree. And one of the biggest highlights to me is like, hey, this is something that Nick and I liked from the get-go. Kyle obviously had been a long time reader, so it's something that he was even more enthusiastic about. Nick ended up, taking a look at the books. And it's something that my wife and I, so of all the people, that I kind of talk about shows with, it's something that all of us were excited to have continue, and it's fun to have it, conclude and complete. Yeah. And for the most part, it was on parity, at least effects wise and how things looked. Yeah. Like, it didn't look like they lost budget or they lost momentum. Like it continued all the way through at a good pace. And so I hate it when things don't get completed or they don't get completed at a good quality. And I feel like
Raised by Wolves.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, that completed was definitely not a hit.
By the way, John, just a quick update. They completely removed it from HBO.
Wow. Which they're also doing with Westworld, and they're also doing with
Sesame Street.
They're doing it with a number of things, because the idea is they can get subscribers on their other services under their banner if they put it elsewhere. So anyway, that's a whole other thing, but crazy that it's just completely gone. Wow. But yeah, so I guess one of my biggest things that I'm appreciative for is like we got a completion to it, and I haven't been, kind of up to date on your guys' books to show differences quite as much, because we were lagging behind on completing a little bit. I don't want to get spoilers, but so it might just be, it just ended the way the book ended, and it wasn't my favorite ending, but overall we got it completed and it's good quality. So I talked for a while. Go ahead and tell me what you were thinking.
You're right, though. It's one of those things where it's tough, right? You have the book and you have your show you have to complete. Yeah. Obviously, we did a lot of comparisons here talking about what they left out of the books, and they left out a lot of stuff because you have to. It happens with Lord of the Rings and everything here.
Yeah.
But I was just curious, John, did anything take you out of the show? Like, was there anything? Because think about, because you're not a book reader. Did the Mulefas take you out? Those animal rolling pin characters, or did the seeing the angels physical form, did that bother you at all? Like stuff like that. Did that bug you, or was it fine?
So angels, I'm always interested to see what the creative interpretation and presentation is going to be for angels, because I love movies that touch on, kind of mythology and theology and things like that. And so seeing different depictions of angels, I'm sure they weren't going to do, the whole time I was sure they weren't going to do the very classic, looking angels like you get in, like medieval or whatever, tapestries and things like that. So I sure it was going to be different. Those didn't bother me. I thought the kind of cool, like kind of translucent, almost crystallized version of them in certain cases was fine. Actually, just having them look like regular people kind of reminded me of the movie Constantine, if you guys have ever seen it with Keanu Reeves, where they just look like regular people, except in that movie they're like in slick suits and stuff. But so it's like, having them look like regular people is fine. I can't even think of their names. You just mentioned them. The rolling anteaters, I just kept talking. Those didn't bother me so much as in season. When did we get Mary in the show?
Mary
was that season
came
2?
In season 2.
She was one of my absolute favorite characters of the whole series. I loved the actress. I loved the character she portrayed. And the anteaters didn't bother me as much as she spent all of season 3, except for like 5 minutes, talking to roller skating. Kate called them roller skating anteaters. And like, so they felt really weird to look at. And I didn't really feel like they fit the world as well as maybe other things would, but it was more that they just took away from what I felt like was Mary's arc, because, you're going to play the serpent and all this was hinted at. And then she did for 5 minutes. The rest of the time she was just hanging out, talking to,
basically
the Gandhi of anteaters. What
we see from her story from the show, especially because they definitely remove, because half of the third book is her in the Mulefa world. That's like half the book, because she's really discovering dust and like the nature of it, and it's just, obviously it's really reduced in this story, and there's so much dialogue that even happens at the end of the book when she plays the serpent and she tells us, so there's so much more that needed to happen, but we just didn't get it because of timing,
which is perfectly understandable. I mean, you're going to have to cut. Nick and I love Lord of the Rings. We think of it as really representing the books well, but they still cut out a lot of stuff or condensed it or had lines here, lines there. You have to do that. But, I guess the showrunners, I don't think they wanted more time to do the main Dark Material series. They supposedly wanted to do stories after his Dark Materials and it didn't get approved. So in that sense, they consider it getting canceled because they wanted to do more. Yeah. But do you think they could have used like a book 3 part 1 and book 3 part 2 like the Deathly Hallows, or do you think it would have started to stretch out too much? Like, since you've read the book, do you think there was enough to warrant that, or do you think they would have ran out of stuff and had to do filler?
I think there was enough to go like 12 episodes.
Oh, just a longer season.
With
that makes sense.
I mean, I'm not a fan of stretching the series too, because too much of a good thing is a bad thing. I love that quote from Community. Troy's eating a giant cookie and he starts to get sick. He's like, I never thought too much of a good thing's a bad thing, because it's like, you can't, it's just like the perfect line when it comes to all this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, and it's one of those things we always want to see more, but when it comes to storytelling's sake, sometimes it's good not to have everything, because it's not a book. It's a medium of a TV show, or it's a medium of a movie. It's not the medium of a book where you can just read every little detail and character thought and stuff like that. Obviously, it's a different medium, so it needs to be portrayed differently. But overall, I thought they did a good job. I'm definitely bummed a lot of things were left out. But I thought the actors did a good job. I struggle a little bit with Will and Lyra's love story. I thought that was just a little bit like, could have been the writing, it could have been them, it could have been a lot of factors that came into it, but it's also could have been that they didn't have enough time to actually fall in love, because the first half of, or the first quarter of the third season, they're separate, and he's looking for her and she's being drugged by her mom. And then after that, they're basically in the land of the dead, and it's not like time for them to it is time if they would have spent the right time for them to develop together, them actually going to the land of the dead together. If anything cements a relationship, a friendship, or anything, going through death and coming out the other side. You know what I mean? Like, you would think, but...
And Nick would know, because that's where he met his wife, was in the land of the dead,
but like, so I struggled, but Mrs. Coulter, Ruth Wilson, I believe is her name, she killed it again. Like, she's always been like one of my favorite characters throughout the whole series, season 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
Anytime she has a scene, she like commands it. She like takes control acting wise. It's just like, I'm not worthy. She did such a good job. And then Lord Asriel, oh man, what's the actor's name? Oh my gosh, he plays
Professor X.
Professor X. I know, but what's his name? We deep faked him on a Frodo. What's his name? Oh my gosh. Oh, this will bug me. But anyways,
but they were such a good actor and actress, and honestly, I guess
James McAvoy. Sorry.
At least with Kate and I watching this, we kind of thought there was going to be more of a closing off of their arcs, and I'm kind of jumping around because you're asking me what I liked and what I didn't like. Because Kate kept like, God, man, it's so weird that we keep wondering, like, so what's Mrs. Coulter's thing? Like, what's her motive? We got a little bit of that when she was talking to the Regent and stuff like that. Like, she's like, I have this feeling for Lyra, and I don't want to have it, but I do. I used to not care. And so we got a little bit of her, final understanding of her as a character, but she does her thing, like her force thing.
Neo.
And
that's basically
Neo
she
from
did
the
her
third
Neo.
Matrix. the funniest thing about certain scenes in this season is, I think I had talked to Nick off air a couple weeks ago. It's like, I feel like they're doing like the Matrix limbo when he's stuck in the subway station where he's trying to get back to whatever, and it just felt, that's what when they were in like the limbo hell thing too, it kind of felt like that. I like that area, but it's just like, okay, they're just throwing out weird stuff to try and have us think about things. But I guess the biggest thing that kind of bummed me out is how some of the characters ended. Because as much as I love Mrs. Coulter, as much as I love, Professor, Azrael and things like that, just they had a huge moment at the very end. But at the same time, it's like, man, I felt like I wanted more of as far as a rounding out. Like everything was leading up to this moment where, there's this war coming, and that's a whole other thing we'll talk about.
The battle? Gosh.
Yeah, the battle, and comparing it to like Game of Thrones, the Dark Knight or whatever it is. Because there's an interesting thing that annoys me about how they have to do these things in series, but I completely understand it. So that's something we'll get into. But yeah, I guess just some of the characters and not getting enough out of them. I wanted more time with Mary not just talking to the roller skating anteaters. Yeah, and I wanted a little bit more of just like... and that's a good thing. If they created characters that I like so much that I wanted to have more time with them, they did a good job. But I would have loved a little bit more of an understanding of why, Mrs. Coulter could do the Neo thing and destroy those things and where that came from. Because she had one conversation with, Buddha Angel, and then she magically understood her powers. And
Yep.
It's funny because all the new characters they've introduced, like the roller skating anteaters, notice I don't call them by their name, even though Nick keeps trying to correct me, because I didn't have enough an attachment to even remember. Yeah. And then the golden Buddha woman,
Angels,
that
basically.
I mean, I think they had names. If they didn't, then I don't feel bad for not remembering. But overall, like some of these new characters, I just wasn't nearly as attached to.
Yeah, too much, too fast, almost. And it's one of those things like in Return of the King and even in the Two Towers, you get introduced to new characters, but you remember who they are because of their moments, right? Like King Denethor doesn't come until the third movie as the steward of Gondor, but like we remember him and his arc and how he treated his sons, and then King Theoden of Rohan.
Theoden and Wormtongue.
And like all those characters come through, but like obviously it's not the Fellowship, but it's characters we learn about along the way.
Yeah.
And we remember those characters because of the way they're introduced. And if you miss that punch, you miss that punch. You know what I mean? Like you can't remember the characters. And it's tough with angels too, I guess, because you could be confused, like, whoa, that person's in a robe and that, you know what I mean? Like it's tough, and at least they had physical forms, because in the book they're all transparent. You can't physically see angels. So I mean, that was a bold choice they went with for the show, to have physical beings walking around and stuff like that too. So do
you think that would have been a better creative choice to have them? Do you think they needed to have them be voices, personified as people, or do you think the voices would have done it? Well,
that's a tough one, because I think voices could have done it with the transparency, but I don't know what that would cost them for the VFX budget. Mm-hmm. If they had to have glittery, transparent angels, like where it's just enough, something's there, kind of thing. But
don't make them too glittery. I don't want to see Twilight Angels. I don't want that. Like I would immediately turn it off and never complete the seasons if you start giving me glittering angels. Like that would drive me crazy.
So funny. Okay, so let's talk about this battle, because the battle was so small compared to the battle in the books.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so my little thing I was going to say is, obviously Game of Thrones was a lot longer. We had 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. You're leading up to that episode that I think was called The Dark Knight. for 8 seasons.
Yeah.
And it was good. It was fun. I liked it, but it was over in one episode after 8 seasons. And here we've been leading up to this war for so long, and it was cool. It looked fine. I'm not saying anything didn't look good, but it resolved itself so quickly. I'm just like,
it was like half an episode almost, right? It was even
which is a lot. That's a lot of heavy visual effects war stuff, but at the same time, it's like, man, it just came in compared to wars that really happen, that go on for years, that just happen so quickly. But then again, it's more of like a battle. Azrael kept calling it a war, but it was really kind of a battle. He's like, boy, I'm glad we don't have to win this, and you see they would have gotten crushed, so it worked fine. It's a bummer when it's built up to this climax for so long and it just is over maybe quicker than I would have hoped. But then again, I guess it's the same way in like the Two Towers and the Return of the King, those huge battles that I think of as being so epic. I guess those probably didn't even go as long as that because they had to fit everything into the one movie.
Well, I guess what made it work, I think, for Lord of the Rings, I mean, we bring up Lord of the Rings all the time.
Yeah,
but,
sorry.
It was the cutting back to Frodo and Sam. It made it feel longer because the battle's going on, they're losing, and we cut to Sam and Shelob fighting, and that's happening. And
but they did that with with Lyra and Will, though, right? To the Land of the Dead. So I mean, it's kind of the same thing.
So the issue was they entered the battle. I think it wasn't like taking place in separate. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're there, but so like in the books, for example, John, the battle's going on, and they enter the battle mid battle, right? Like the thing, but it's like chaos in the book because they're like running through a battlefield. Like they're dodging, getting hit. I mean, like people are attacking them and they have armies that are coming to help them. Like it's just chaotic while they're looking for their demons, and then they have to jump through a hole. So we don't even know the whole battle plans in the book. It's just like we just see like glimpses of it from their perspective, and then we jump through another world kind of thing. So it was very interesting that they really focused on the battle. It's kind of like the Hobbit movies, how they decided to do the Battle of the Five Armies all the way through, where in the books Bilbo gets knocked out like the beginning of the battle, and then he wakes up.
That's right.
He wakes up and he's like, what happened to the battle? And it's because J.R. Tolkien didn't want to encourage kids to like war.
Oh, interesting.
So he wanted to cut it out basically so they can talk about the battle, but he didn't want to physically write about the battle for a children's book.
I forgot about that. And they do that in the animated film to an extent too. It's like,
he gets knocked out.
I was knocked out. What happened? Mm-hmm. And it's not a bad storytelling device, like you said, especially if you don't want to have to dwell on that too long. Yeah. But here, obviously, we didn't have that scenario. But it's interesting to hear the reasons why and how it can be a storytelling device. But all I saw, I liked. It just kind of came and went pretty fast. The same way that Game of Thrones. But Game of Thrones, I would say, is even worse because it was 8 seasons long and they've been talking about. Again, I liked the episode. It just came and went a little bit fast. Mm-hmm. Whereas maybe spreading that out over like 2 episodes, even if it wasn't there the whole time, like Nick was talking about, it might have felt a little bit more, boy, that war lasted at least a couple weeks worth of episodes, So it's like, it's kind of one of those things.
Visual stuff now. Were you a fan of the intention craft? The craft that they fly around in to get to places quickly. Were you a fan of the design? I'm not saying story plot stuff, but visual effects wise, were you cool with it? Did it work for you?
It kind of almost looked like an Iron Giant type thing where it like just looked like, I mean, I'm not saying it did, but it looked like, I forgot what they call it when they make stuff look almost like
steampunk?
Retro technology. Yeah, it's steampunk, I guess. There's another term I'm thinking of too, but steampunk's a good way of putting it. It threw me off a little bit, but at the same time, I didn't even know he had a craft until all of a sudden he was flying in it. So I didn't have any expectation of what it should look like. And it's a whole different, it's like kind of like a similar, world that he's been living in and stuff, but it's the technology and, we don't have demons walking around with us. I have a couple dogs, but if I stay for the, so it didn't bother me so much that it looked a little bit foreign to me. But it did throw me off a couple times. Like, oh, there's that weird octopus flying thing again, But did that fit the description of the books? Pretty were much. You thrown off by it too? Or no,
pretty much it worked overall for the story and stuff. It's just one of those things you read about it and then you have your own idea of what it is. Yeah. And as it is, when it's described with legs and tentacles and as it is, it's already, I mean, it's the same thing with the Mulefa in the books. The Mulefa in the books have a diamond shaped body frame. It's not.
Oh,
They don't
interesting.
even have a skeleton. They're even more funkier, and they have like hooks that hook into the sea pods, and they push. So they're even more alien like in the books than they are in the
So they
show.
made them much more organic,
Yeah.
and which is fine. I mean, you go too crazy, and you might lose people. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know why, but if you're reading a book, you're just way more
It
accepting.
works.
And it makes sense because your mind is going to create something that at least feels understandable to you. So it's not going to go way far off to designed by someone else, and you're like, "What the hell is that?" So
No,
it makes
definitely
sense. It
true.
makes sense. Yeah.
And then, were you also a fan of the demons again? Did you think the VFX worked for Pan to Lyman, Will's demon, the cat, Kivara? Were you a fan of that, or is it tough with cats because everyone knows cats, so it just feels awkward when we see a fully
I mean,
CGI cat?
I didn't think about it not fitting. Like my wife and I were like, I wonder what his demon's gonna look like, and then also she's like, oh, he just has a regular house cat. Good job, Will. You know, but we never looked at it and said, boy, that cat doesn't look real either.
Yeah.
Boy, Will really struck out. Like we never thought that. So in that regard, the effects, especially for the demons, which are in a lot of shots,
Yeah.
always held up to me throughout the entire series, which again is maybe as impressive to me as anything else because Nick and I talked about it. I don't think we talked about it too much in season 1 and 2, but I was working at Rhythm and Hues when right as I didn't work on Golden Compass, the movie that came out with Nicole Kidman and whoever else, but
Daniel Craig,
I did
actually. I think
yes, Daniel Craig. That's right. Yeah, James Bond. I did see a lot of the effects, being finished up on the servers at the time, and I just thought, man, it's so crazy how real those creatures look. And obviously, that was a long time ago, and a lot of technology has evolved a lot. But for this to be a streaming show that obviously had a budget, but for everything, all the demons to always look convincing to me, to where there was never even a single shot where I looked at it and said, "Gosh, that." They kind of dropped it on that one. For that to have never happened even once, like, man, that's pretty cool that we've gotten to this point.
Especially when I feel like visual effects are going the other way right now because there's like an overload of VFX where I feel like artists are being strained. And you know what I mean? I feel like quality is being pushed down over quantity. It's like, they're like, we need more shots, so let's push down quality and have more quantity of VFX shots. That's what I feel like's happening. I don't know, but sometimes you look at the older stuff and it holds up better than some of the newer stuff, and especially because everything uses VFX now. And this show is very VFX heavy when it comes to the scenery and now the Mulefa and now the little people, the little brownies, the Galvespians, and you have a polar bear who's back and fighting everyone, and so you have like all this heavy VFX stuff in a show. It's just, and you have some top name actors in this too, which are just doing, and so it had to be a pretty expensive budget. I'm bummed it was almost rushed with the releases, how they released 2 episodes a week. I think they could have maybe spaced it out another 2 months. I was just like, wow, why are they releasing 2 episodes? But then in the BBC or in London, they released everything all at once on the BBC.
Wow.
So we
like
were actually
Netflix
getting
style,
comments, people asking questions about the ending. I'm like, what? Like, what's going on? People are like, yeah, we have it here in London. I'm like, oh, that's great to know. It's just like, what is going on here?
Funny.
Like,
I didn't know that.
But yeah, and that, by the way, thanks to you guys for commenting. It gave us the idea to do the Man in the Box episode, so it worked out perfectly.
But yeah, I actually really was surprised they did it 2 at a time, because I thought my thought would be, these streaming services, HBO Max is cutting all kinds of budget stuff now that they're merged with Discovery, and they're cutting stuff out. And you would think if you want people to stay subscribed longer, you would stretch that out as long as you can. Yeah. And honestly, like say they had made the war 2 episodes and it wasn't back-to-back episodes, that would have made it feel like that happened over a lot, longer period of time.
That's true.
But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's reasons why they do that. Maybe they've done market research and, data analysis, stuff like that. But at the same time, they've been doing that with a lot of shows, including Amazon and other streaming services that have them in episodal and usually spread them out. Yeah. And that's always been a little bit confusing to me. Now, I don't mind it because I get to, all right, on to the next episode. Woo! I get all excited. But at the same time, it's like, man, for how much time you spent making this and how much money went into it, I would have thought they probably would have wanted to spread it out. But, who knows? I don't know.
And what's crazy, too? You compare this to a show like Rings of Power. It's amazing how good the VFX looked. Like, Rings of Power had good VFX, but it was so clean. It almost didn't even fit in
Yes.
with the
And
stylized
that's actually maybe the thing that threw me off the most in that series is even when they tried to make it look dirtier and aged, it still looked really clean.
It looked super clean. Where the compositing with the VFX, like it looks so good, and that the quality stayed the same throughout all the episodes. You look at the new Witcher show; it's terrible. The VFX, the little spinoff they did.
I didn't see the new spinoff.
The new spinoff was just like, what is going on here? And then there was even a couple shots in Willow. I was watching Willow. I'm like, what? Like it's just like, I just don't get it. What's going on with their choices of VFX and like stuff like that. So I'm very curious to see where that goes with the VFX. But overall, His Dark Materials, John, would you rate it? Are you feeling confident enough to give season 3 a rating?
Yeah, I mean, it season 1 and 2 were really hard to beat because there was all kinds of questions, and since they were based on 3 books, you had the confidence, at least I had the confidence that it was going to lead somewhere legitimate instead of like a series like Lost where they're making up stuff as they go. So I had that confidence, but they also filmed season 1 and 2 back to back. This is when the streaming wars were just starting, where I feel like they were putting in endless funds, and now they're kind of getting to a point where, all the streaming platforms are starting to cut back. And I didn't see a lack in quality at all. The only thing that lacked was some of the answers and the conclusions that I got weren't maybe fully to my liking, but that's just a story thing. That's not a quality thing. So to me, like, I would say like, it's probably, maybe a 7 or 8, maybe higher than that, maybe like a solid 8, which is very, very good. I just think the season 1 and 2 were just so much to my liking. But again, they were giving us questions all the way along, whereas here they had to wrap all those up. And as a viewer invested in 3 seasons, if you don't like how those questions get wrapped up as answers, then you might just not like it as much. So I didn't like some of the way things ended, especially the very far ending, with Will and Lyra and how all this worked. I wasn't a huge fan of that, but I still loved the journey so much that it was still a very good season. You know, so I would say like an 8, whereas like season 1 and 2 would maybe be like a 9 and a 10, which is ultra high praise. So to me, it was a wonderful, like, marvelous, like, triumph as far as streaming. Like if we had shows that were consistently at that quality, like, boy, what a wonderful world we'd be in all the time.
The only place we seem like we're getting it most of the time, not all the time, is HBO Max. It looks like they do put the time and quality into their shows for the most part. Obviously you're gonna get duds and stuff, and like Netflix is such a roller coaster with their shows. Like you can have such a good show and then it's just like, what are they doing?
Well, but I also feel like a lot of the other streaming platforms might slowly be going towards the Netflix style of like, we need to cancel this, we need to cut the budget here. So I feel like maybe potentially, and I'm hoping I'm wrong, we've seen the best of streaming for a while. Because I don't think, based on, I don't know what the budget was for His Dark Materials, but it's clearly a high budget. Yeah. His Dark Materials might not have gotten greenlit in this era of where the streaming platforms, all they wanted to do at first was establish an audience. And now that they're having to see, we establish an audience, but we're losing, in some cases, billions of dollars they need to make up. I don't know if these things happen or continue the way that Netflix has been kind of criticized for doing that. And you understand why they have to do that, but at the same time, it's like, oh man. So yeah.
Well, you guys, there you have it from John. If you're lost like John with the ending, come here to our channel. We've been doing breakdown videos. We'll do our best to answer all your questions. Me and Kyle are book readers, and we encourage everyone else to read the books too. If you are frustrated with the show and missing plots and stuff like that, highly recommend reading the books or even doing the audiobooks. There's great voice acting on the audiobooks too and stuff. Totally worth a listen. Listen. I'm
a reader.
And on that note, go to AsArt.space to go get our awesome shirts and subscribe to the channel, get all of our updates on His Dark Materials and other shows we're going to be covering. Me and Kyle have talked about starting up the deep dives with Dune again, because the second Dune movie is going to be coming out this year.
Oh, I'm excited. So, is it this year?
Yeah, this year. So it's really exciting. We got that to look forward to, and we'll see you on the next AsArt. Yeah, those awesome. Gallivestrians really pissed off Kyle, I'm sure. He was so angry. Oh man, he was